What is up, fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favale coming at you with my fantabulistic co-host, Grant Hughes. We're back with another, long-awaited mailbag. We haven't had one in a minute because we were trying to do our biggest long-term question for each NBA team. That was a instructive exercise, so go check out those pods. But we have another mailbag. Before we get started, my usual reminder to continue subscribing to us wherever you consume us. If you're on YouTube right now, hit that sub button, like and comment to help the algorithm love us back. Subscribe on all the podcast platforms that you possibly can, but most definitely the one that you listen to us on. Or if you're checking us out for the first time, consider throwing us that permanent sub. If you've done all those things, cross-subscribe on YouTube and podcast players. And if you've done those things, please recommend us. Word of mouth, shout-outs on Twitter are appreciated. We got one the other day from longtime listener Noah Odage, and I retweet and respond to every single person. I think. I mean, sometimes I'm probably missing that. Shouts us out. You can help by bumping our promos on Twitter as well, or just following us on all the socials, which are in the podcast and YouTube description links. Also, join the Discord because Grant has made a Discord. He is in the Chizats. He's there. We don't know how active he's going to be. He's lurking. He's watching though. So when you say things, he might see them. If that's not a reason to join the Discord, I don't know what is. And before we cannonball into this mailbag, we ask the question everyone wants to know the answer to. Grant, how many days did it take you to figure out how to sign up for Discord?
Yeah, the snail mail I had to send to the Discord headquarters with like a crayon handwritten note of how do I do the Discords took a long time for them to get that to the appropriate people and back to me. But I handled it. And so I'm hashtag on there. And I'm excited and I'm a little scared. But everybody on there seems really cool. So I like the idea of if you're involved in it, it's because you're interested in talking about the same things we are and like being cool to each other. And it's kind of like what I imagine Twitter or other social media like wanted to be like the early stages. So I'm pretty down for that. I'm excited. I'm looking forward to meeting some of the regulars and, wrapping it into the pod. And like, as an example, like we got a bunch of great questions today. And so I think it's only going to be a positive. So I'm excited.
I saw when the username came up, I was like, I think that might be Grant, but I wouldn't put it past like maybe a listener to make a Grant account just to like see. So good to know that it was actually you. But yes, I echo everything you said about Discord. It's such a small portion of our listenership, but it's the most like and this isn't to insult any other. Maybe you just don't have Discord. I've had people the past few weeks ask me about like what's my Mastodon, and I'm like, isn't that like a Power Rangers thing? Like I like so I understand why you wouldn't be on Discord, but everyone on there, while they represent a small subsection of our listenership, like they're really invested in basketball and it seems the podcast. So it's fun to interact with them. And hey, that's why we don't do Twitter solicitations at the moment for mailbags, which will actually change this week. I will have a second mailbag up just for Twitter, but we had so many great questions. Are you ready to dive into them?
I'll throw you the first one just for no particular reason. This one comes from Kilhoss. The gist of it is, do you believe that teams need at least two stars to be championship contenders? And that comes in the context of Kilhoss is a Mavs fan and contends that there's kind of a revisionist history to that theory, using the example of, Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton were on a championship team next to Giannis. And I don't think you'd argue necessarily that those guys were top 10 at the time, although there's probably a debate to be had. But I think it's an interesting question because there are exceptions to this quote unquote rule that you need two or more top 10 guys to do it. So I guess I'll throw to you. Do you think that theory is legit or are there exceptions to it beyond the Bucks one of a couple of years ago?
I don't know that you need two top 10 players. Like maybe you need two top 10 players plus depth to be a dynasty. Like when you look at what the Warriors did, peak Warriors, they had a case for like 4 top 20 guys or 4 top 15 guys, depending on where you land with Clay, who we actually have a question on later. But I think it's a prerequisite now to you need like the top 5 to 10 player. And then that kind of informs how good your other star needs to be. And then there's cases of like the Lakers where, they win in 2020 and AD and LeBron, those are both top 10 guys at that point. But did the Raptors, they didn't have 2 top 10 guys when they beat. Granted, the Warriors were hobbled beyond comprehension, but like they had Kawhi, and then they had Pascal Siakam wasn't Siakam yet. OG wasn't OG yet. They had Kyle Lowry, so I do think you need a second star. But the examples to me are kind of like Chris Middleton and Drew Holiday. Do you need multiple of those guys? I don't think you need that on top of your top 10 player. I think you need another guy who in any given season can be on the fringes of the all NBA discussion. We're talking another top 25 guy. Now, I think what's interesting about Dallas, which isn't the case anymore, when you had Jalen Brunson, I looked at him as sort of like the season he had last year. To me, that's probably the worst second best player you could have on a team with title aspirations. That's not to discredit Jalen Brunson, but that feels like venturing too far outside. Can he be a top 25 player in any given season? That's where, and we had this question a while ago, and so it's one I've thought a lot about, but I don't think, and maybe you feel differently having watched the Warriors all these years, but I don't think you need like that super high end other star. It might just come down to your definition of a star. Is a top 25 player a star?
Yeah, I think you mentioned I think the prerequisite is you got to have a top five-ish guy. And like anything, maybe 6, maybe 7, like the idea that you need 2 top 10s, it's like a shorthand, it's kind of like a heuristic of how seriously should we take this team based on its top 2 players. It could be 2 and 15, it could be 3 and 20 and 23 or something like that. I think the key is you probably got to have that guy who is in an MVP conversation, like on the short list, generally speaking. And beyond that, you can get away with some other combinations depending on the fit. But I think the other key that, speaking of the Warriors, their GM Bob Myers, I'll get it wrong and won't get it verbatim, but his theory is beyond that top 5 guy, beyond the Steph type player that just changes everything, you kind of have to have as many guys as possible. This is your depth point that can't really be schemed off the floor or attacked or have some kind of exploitable weakness, which is not true of the regular season, but for the playoffs. And the deeper you get into the playoffs, the more teams are looking for like, where's the weak point?
Yeah.
Where can we attack? Where can we sort of create advantages? And so, I mean, that's the theory, I think, of like the Clippers construction is just have theoretically your top 5 guy in Kawhi. Again, we're talking theoretically, another top, 10, 20 guy in Paul George, and then a bunch of guys that will not get attacked, will not be ignored as 3-point shooters, will not be like called up to be in the pick and roll every time in the last 5 minutes because we know we can get something. You just need guys that can't be played off the floor. And that's just another way to talk about depth. But depth means something different, I think, in a championship pursuit than it does in the regular season. Like a playable guy in the regular season can just be essentially useless in a conference finals if a smart team is like really being ruthless about going at them.
It's also interesting how the structure of your depth might inform what you are looking to do for your playoff rotation, where it's how much are you shortening it? Because if you have 2 stars on the same roster, those are 2 guys that you just want on the court for 40 minutes a game. And so you're inherently filling less minutes, fewer minutes. But if you have only 1, like that's almost an extra spot that you sort of need to make sure you're talking about the depth that can't be played off the floor. That's almost, is it harder to find? Is it easier? I do think though, when you just look back at the past champions and like think like more recent NBA history, like the 2, they're like these. So let's say this, the Mavericks in 2011 and that Pistons team in 2000, what was that, 2004?
Yeah.
Like those are the exceptions. Those aren't the rule. When you go throughout all those other champions, I know there are some people who are like, well, what about the Spurs? And so like, was Kawhi at that level then? He was, so it does, there is a gray area to it, but it does feel like the teams that don't have multiple stars, and I'll say within the top 25,
yeah,
like those are more so they're anomalies to me when you just go back through definitely recent NBA history.
Yeah, I think like a good counter case is like I always get the year wrong, like 2014 or 15, the Hawks team that won 60 some odd games and had 4 all-stars. Like that's not going to be a playoff winner just because there's nobody within the, Horford, Teague, Korver. I feel like Damari Carroll. I feel like I'm forgetting someone really obvious that was maybe the best player on that team.
Teague, would you say Teague, Horford, Paul
Teague.
Millsap?
Paul
Amari
Millsap.
Cooper. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like a bunch of really good players, but there's no one in the vicinity of the top 5. So it's just like it's a non-starter because you just don't have the guy that will just completely be the focus of the other team's defense and just like save you and win you 2 or 3 playoff games. You have to have that guy for sure.
Can I ask you 2 spur of the moment mailbag questions that I now have after this discussion?
Absolutely.
Who is the worst player in the NBA right now that could be the best player on a championship level team?
Oh, so who's like the last guy you'd pick as a number 1 on
On a
a
title
title win?
contender, and not, oh well, we can envision if he had Luka next to him, like he could. It would have to be like that's your 1A guy.
So like are we talking about like the Devin Booker range? Like, we haven't seen it yet, but I mean, I think Tatum is definitely in, like,
I
for
think he's
sure could
there.
be the
I,
best player. It might be someone like Morant, or we might be like, I don't think Donovan Mitchell, for example, could be your number 1 guy. So it's got to be someone better than him. Um, I mean, it might be someone way better than we're thinking because it's just like, is it Embiid? Is it Jokic? Like, I don't know because we haven't seen it. It might be the case that someone that good still isn't good enough because you're not operating in a vacuum. You're still having to theoretically beat Curry, Luka, Giannis, like all the guys that are we don't really have any question that they could be the number 1. So I'm punting. I'm dodging your question because I don't know where that cutoff is, but it's going to be a really good player that isn't good enough. It will be below that cutoff line.
if the answer is like Embiid or Jokic, that's pretty harrowing because those are just like consensus top 7 guys when they're healthy at this point.
Yeah.
There's more that goes into it, like Embiid's health, but we've had the Jokic discussion about how you might need to be more particular about how you flesh out specifically your playoff defense when he's on the court because of how teams like the Warriors could try to attack him there. My first inclination was, we made such a good point about Embiid and Jokic, was like probably like the Devin Booker, SGA, John Morant tier there,
Yeah.
which is wild because those are all NBA
Right.
players, basically.
Right. I mean, the list of guys that you would say I'm 100% confident could be the best player on a title team probably shouldn't go past like 5, right?
It's Giannis. Right now it'd be Giannis, Steph. I am confident Tatum can be there. I don't know where you're
Agreed.
landing on him being
Agreed.
right there. Is Kevin Durant an answer still? Like, is
I think
that
I think so. I think he probably has to be. But you still,
is LeBron still an answer? Probably
I don't
not,
think
right?
so. I don't think so. I mean, maybe he's the answer to who's the best player that couldn't be the number 1 on a championship team right now. Like, or he's in that discussion, I think, too. That's really interesting. I don't know. It's a short list. It has to be a short list because you got to beat all the other guys on it.
Is then, and this is kind of my follow-up question, but it's twofold. Is Luka on that list? And more to that point, and I think this is just more topical because of how much they've been struggling. Are the Mavericks fundamentally failing Luka Doncic at this point?
I think Luka probably is good enough to be the number 1 guy right now, but I don't think. And so, which leads into your second, the part 2 of that question: are they failing him? Probably, because I think the blueprint. I thought about this earlier today. I think the blueprint for Doncic, the super duper high usage, heliocentric. Like, there's no one else really on this team that makes the offense go like he does. I think you have to look at like the very best James Harden Rockets teams, which like get shit on a lot and are sort of already forgotten, but had some monster regular seasons and were like, whatever it was, 17 or 27 straight missed threes against the Warriors from advancing and maybe winning a title. And then had that happened, like, how differently would we view a ton like Harden or the notion of building a roster like the Rockets did? I guess I'm like shortchanging because Chris Paul was on those really good teams, but the idea of Harden and switchable positionless defenders who can make catch and shoot threes and maybe a role guy. I think that could work for Dallas, but they just don't have so many of Dallas's players. Going back a little bit, have weaknesses that are exploitable. Like you take like Christian Wood's certainly, I think, a top 5 player on that roster. Some people would say 2, but I think, but defensively, you sort of can't play him against really good teams. And, Dinwiddie's fine. Dorian Finney-Smith, definitely. That's, if you had like 3 Dorian Finney-Smith types, I think that makes more sense than what the Mavs have done so far. You should still be looking for that other top 10 guy, just because that broadens your spectrum of options to fill out the rest of your top 7 or 8 for a playoff rotation. But I think the fact that like Porzingis leaves, and it seemed clear that Porzingis was not good enough to be the number 2 for Luka on a team that was going to do anything, and he's kind of been playing better away from Luka. So I'm not willing to say it's just the Mavs. I think it's partly the Mavs letting Luka play a certain way that wears him down, that makes it predictable for really good playoff defenses. That, like, everybody's kind of at fault, but I do, just the basics of it are Dallas should have been doing and should do a better job of surrounding Luka with enough talent, because you don't know how long a prime is going to last. You don't know. Crazy things happen. He's good enough. If he's good enough right now, like we're saying, or like we think, then quit fucking around. Like, this roster has to be better.
The 22-23 Mavs quit fucking around. I think that's the best synopsis of it. I would agree with everything you said. And I think there's a real question of, can Luka play a different way? I just don't have an answer, because they haven't even given him the chance to try, really. Yeah. And look, to be honest, Porzingis isn't the guy you try it with. Mm-hmm. And I think what's maybe different is you see it with Luka and Christian Wood. Like, there's more of a comfort level there, and it's clear that he likes playing with Christian Wood. I also, side note, don't understand why Christian Wood's defense is too bad or to guarantee him playing time, but like Jason Kidd is just perfectly okay with Tim Hardaway Jr. and Reggie Bullock shooting this team out of games, and they're allowed to stay on the floor. So I don't understand that. But the James Harden like comparison seems most apt, where, okay, maybe Luka can't play a drastically different way. I still would argue a little differently, because he's so like, he's big and he's thick. Like, why not use Luka as the screener? We've already seen what he can do in the post at a higher volume than the Rockets ever explored with Harden in the post. I think there are different ways to use him, but you don't have the personnel to try it. And you have it even less than ever now that Jalen Brunson's gone. And that's not to bemoan a previous point, but like, you let your second best player, your second most important ball handler, leave for nothing. And or let's not say let, because it was his decision and we don't know how burnt the bridges were at that point, but like, you botched that situation. If you knew he was leaving, then you should have moved him. So like, not having any return there hurts. But I think what's more frustrating about this team is that you look at it and you understand why they haven't done anything to sort of rush into a bigger acquisition. They just don't have the asset equity to do so. And it's almost smarter to say, we need to wait for this 2023 pick to convey to the Knicks so that we can reset our obligations and really go all in with the picks we can offer. I still don't know what that gets them, because yes, we've seen Danny Ainge accepted 2 trade packages built around basically draft pick returns. Like, yeah, Larry Markkanen's been great. He wasn't the centerpiece of the Donovan Mitchell deal for Utah. But the fact that their infrastructure, like, yeah, there are players that might interest other teams, Maxi Kleber, Dorian Finney-Smith, even Reggie Bullock. But like, one, you probably want to keep DFS, like, on any version of the Mavs that's supposed to be really good. Who are you outbidding for certain players if there's actual competition for them? And so, short of someone like Bradley Beal having a no trade clause and demanding his way to Dallas, but what I would also note is that you mentioned Chris Paul for the Rockets. It is still then doable. Like, that was a very, like, it wasn't James Harden and Chris Paul playing off each other a ton. Like, you go back and look at their, spot up numbers during that time. Like, they weren't like drastically skyrocketing compared to where they were. At least someone then who can give Luka Doncic a break, where like, maybe you're still not running a ton of stuff for him away off the ball, but you are able to trade off that responsibility. That Rockets team, that Rockets core was good enough to win a title. They just didn't. And it was so short-lived that who knows what could have happened if they stuck together and the Harden CP3 thing didn't fracture. Now, is Luka tough to play with to where he's grading on teammates? I don't know. I still think he's one of the most brilliant passers in the game. And I think we've seen it just takes a certain type of player where if they envision more for themselves, like, let's look at PJ Tucker in Philly. He's doing all this stuff on the ball in Miami last year. But he decides to go back to Daryl Morey and James Harden in Philly. And like, so there are players that might just be more comfortable playing where they're not going to have a ton of, long on ball touches or, be moving a bunch off the ball. Like, you can still make it work. The Mavs just haven't. And I want to make clear, to some extent, I understand why they haven't rushed in to this mega upgrade, because in part, I don't think they have the ability to do it. but I'm not sure that after this season you have the ability to do it and sort of just have this really slapdash process where it led you to waiving Facundo Campazzo to sign Kemba Walker, who was just floating around on the open market. Like, who knows what his knees look like? He looked pretty cooked a lot of the time in New York. That's just a really precarious situation to put yourself in. And I do think that they are fundamentally failing Luka, and sort of the weirdo groundswell of Luka should involve his teammates more is just, yes, he's so ball dominant. I, one, believe it's because he has to be, and two, the dude is third in potential assists per game. It's not like he's not setting up or teeing up his teammates.
Yeah, we're never going to get off this question, but do you think, and because I don't know what I think it's worth having a discussion. Like, if you're a second star or a second star type that we all think Dallas probably should prioritize getting when they have the resources to do it, do you think there are guys lining up that want to play with Luka? Like, is he someone, because it's not the same as like, because if we're going to talk about him in that top tier, I think everybody on the planet would want to play with Giannis because of like, well, in addition to being a great scorer, like he's going to cover up your mistakes on defense. He's like, very unselfish, like just wants to do what the team needs to win. Steph is the same way. People want to play there because, he creates so many opportunities for other guys and is just not about himself. Like, I'm not trying to say that Luka is or is like really distinct from those guys, but it does feel to me like if I'm a second star, and I think probably I'm good enough to be the number one option on like 15 other teams. If, how good those teams are going to be, I don't know, but like I'm good enough to do that. Do I want to go somewhere where a guy's got like a 40% usage and maybe that comes down a little bit, but I'm constantly I'm going to have to change everything about how I play. That's a rare like top end, put you over the top player that's also willing to go and be like, I might get 11 shots a game. They might all be wide open, but my role is I'm just never going to be able to, like, I just feel like that's a little bit of a hurdle with Luka playing this way, even if I would concede that, yeah, it's partly because the Mavs just don't really have better options. He has to be on the ball all the time, but that's a hurdle, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I mean, but we've seen like the Nets wanting James Harden when they already had Kyrie and KD.
Right.
Didn't end well, but I think that was I feel like it literally had nothing to do with basketball for the most part, which is why it didn't end well. That being said, it's like, how much do pre-existing relationships factor it in? And because Luka, like, his home base is not like the United States, and like he didn't come up with these guys, like, does he have those interstar relationships? I'm not claiming he's not likable or that international stars or like somehow suck. So that's a factor, which I think, would almost lead me to say, like, that's why you have to make it via trade, because then you try to see if it works, see if a player is just at that point, maybe Luka changes the way he plays. Maybe it just works out so well and there's winning that players just stick around. It's easier to keep them once you have them in-house. I don't think it's a situation where, yes, if you were the Nets with Kevin Durant and Kyrie, you could very much bank on James Harden forcing his way to Brooklyn. I don't know that you could do that with Luka, which is why you're just going to have to go out, and you might not, players aren't leaving in free agency right now, but let's just say the next CBA, which is, too far down the line, actually, like by the time we're thinking about that, we're thinking about Luka's next contract. Like, let's say you have free agency meetings or you open up cap space to sign a star. I don't know if playing with Luka would be the first choice. Like, you just need to get that star and show them that it can work, and you need to figure out a way to make it work and maybe change up the dynamic compared to what we saw with Chris Paul and James Harden. Like, inject more creativity into that. But it is a fascinating question, because I don't think Luka is completely blameless when you're looking at the stylistic leanings of the Mavs. He is absolutely blameless when it comes to roster construction. Like, it's not like that is entirely on the front office. And that's why we shouldn't, I feel like we shouldn't have this curiosity, I guess is my point, so late into his career. And it's just like, Jalen Brunson is the second best player he's ever played with, right? Like, I guess like Kristaps had moments and like the idea of him was always great, but he was always injured and he was always kind of sub all-star level. He was in New York. I think that really helped inflate his reputation a bit. So like, we just haven't seen it. And look, you know what? When he had Jalen Brunson, I know injuries happen, the circumstances of the season, that's every year. Like, you can point to something like they made it to the Western Conference Finals.
Right. That's where you can stop the analysis. I mean, they made it farther with him and he mattered. Like, he, not so much in the conference finals per se, but getting them there, Brunson was integral, like in a way that Porzingis really never was even close to,
And that's almost more frustrating, because if Jalen Brunson as your second best player and as your best player in the Jazz series because Luka Doncic wasn't available, if that you pair that with Luka and that gets you to the Western Conference Finals, to then just kind of sit like pull back and wait out these pick obligations, or I don't even know what they're waiting for. And like I said, because when you put their best offer on the table, unless it's for a player that has like, cautionary tape around them, like a Kyrie, like I just don't know who they would have the best offer for moving forward.
Yeah, you can't go backwards when all it took for you to reach the conference finals was Jalen Brunson. Like that,
right.
You got to just keep that and add like one or two more pieces, and maybe that's all it takes, right?
Since I hijacked the past two questions, did you want to read the next one?
Oh yeah, well this is better for you anyway. So this comes from Cam Brownish. I'll try to condense it here. So getting rid of the coach is one step, but I think the Knicks have to look at making a trade to improve the spacing and structure of their starting lineup. He cites Julius Randle's jumper is MIA, and so he's limited to scoring around the rim. Mitchell Robinson congests things in there, and really Brunson and RJ Barrett are also, their primary skills are getting into the paint and scoring at close range. So the question, in addition to, do you think the Knicks need to find some spacing and restructure their lineup, which I'm sure you're going to say yes, because you've watched more than 5 seconds of the Knicks. But do you think a Robinson and Fournier to Indiana for Turner and Hield and some picks makes sense? Because then you could replace Fournier with Quickly or Grimes in the starting lineup, which is kind of, Fournier's been out of the picture for a while, but how do you like that fit? Does that make sense? Does that address the spacing? Does that ultimately matter in the grand scheme of Knicks getting better?
Yeah, I should have changed up the question in there because this was asked like a while. We had a backlog because we weren't doing mailbag.
Still a very valid question though about lineup construction and a trade.
They're starting Randle and Mitchell Robinson together still, so it's a valid question. Yeah. So it's like Quentin Grimes has now been in the starting lineup with Jalen Brunson and RJ Barrett, which makes sense, especially with the way that Grimes moves off the ball and up and down the floor. My answer to this is yes. However, I don't know if I'm giving up picks. I want to get off Julius Randle's contract because I think that that's just the biggest. I don't want to say it's the biggest functional stain on this team because he's blocking the pathway to a player who's a better fit alongside what you have in Obi Toppin. His defense has been half-assed or worse for much of this season. And I also, the thing here, giving up at least if you're trading Julius Randle, I think you improve by structure, just looking at the hierarchy of your roster. If you get Miles Turner, do I trust Tibbs to let him continue spacing the floor? Like, because he likes to have these like traditional rim runners. Like, are we all of a sudden going to see Miles Turner like just be more of a screen and roll guy? I have no idea. But I do think what's interesting about this question, I don't think it's talked about enough. And it's not, I want every single player to get paid. So I'm happy Julius Randle got paid. Their market value is what a team was willing to pay them. I have no idea what leverage or what value Mitchell Robinson showed this team that he was worth $460. I don't care that the cap was going up. You first of all, you signed Isaiah Hartenstein anyway. And so, like, what are we doing there? You blocked the pathway further to get more creative with your front court, including Obi. And you had Jericho Sims. And like, when you watch Jericho Sims and his mobility, Jericho Sims is the reason why you don't pay not so dynamic big men like Mitchell Robinson that much money. We didn't even see, I know he had his own injury concerns, RW3. Hey, guess who else had their own injury concerns? Like entering last summer, Mitchell Robinson, and RW3 was better when he signed his extension than Mitchell Robinson is right now. So that is a curious move. And now we talking about, is this low key? Like the number's just smaller and can be used as trade fodder. And I think Julius Randle and Evan Fournier have been bigger issues that it's sort of flown under the radar. Like, that's not a great, like, the Knicks don't have any, like, damning contracts on their books, but they don't have a lot of good ones. There's Jalen Brunson, and then their rookie scales, and the Hartenstein deal is fine. So, I would be on board with a move, because they do need to improve their spacing in lineups, and they also need to just improve, like, the volume at which they take threes. They need guys who are just going to unbottle them in droves. Will Tibbs let them? Again, I do not know. Turner would be a fascinating fit for this roster, even if you are keeping Julius Randle, because he's more of a natural fit next to Julius Randle. It's going to take picks. And there was a Discord discussion about this. If I'm Indy, I don't want, like, it's Mitchell Robinson is just like, and I don't want, like, how many picks are you including here? And I think that's where the pause comes for me. You can view like Buddy Hield's contract is probably like net even value at this point with the way he's played this season. So you're going to have to give up like a player or two in addition to picks. Would I still consider it? It doesn't seem like the Knicks are married to quickly. They're getting into the trap of we wanted all these guys as trade assets, but now these guys are coming up on extensions, and we have no idea what the fuck they are. Yeah, Manuel Quickley's defense has been spectacular. He's shown flashes on offense. Him and Obi are extension eligible. What do you pay those guys? So if I'm the Knicks, I absolutely would want to improve the floor balance via trade. But if you're not acquiring a megastar, it has to be done in scale. And I think to get Miles Turner, because of how good he's been, by the way, he's like really a true shooting percentage over 70 or whatever it is right now. I think you would have to give up too much equity for it to make sense, because your next trade needs to be, if you're not just using a first round pick to get off Julius Randle, your next trade needs to be like the home run swing. And Miles Turner and Buddy Hield are not that. So I support the idea if the Pacers are out of their minds and just want to accept, let's call it nickels on the dollar for those two.
Yeah, I think just from a Knicks perspective, I feel like this really highlights like kind of a broad roster building issue that confronts a lot of teams that are kind of in the middle, which is to say that like there's no question that Randall and Robinson kind of obstruct what probably your two most important players, Brunson and Barrett. I mean, not probably. I think those are your two most important players. It obstructs what they do best, which is get into the lane and then maybe kick out, except there's no one to kick out to because there's 1 to 2 guys, Robinson and Randall, that are just in the way and are not going to be threats to space the floor, to make driving easier, to make finishing easier. So yeah, like get Buddy Hield and Miles Turner in there, essentially play a 5-out style if you're playing Turner at center and Robinson and Randall are not in the equation. But then, like, is it worth giving up picks, which you would have to do to incentivize anyone, and the Pacers for sure, to take Randall and or Robinson? Does it make sense to give up those picks to then essentially be building a roster that is around Barrett and Brunson? Like, are those guys the caliber of players that you want to be sacrificing future assets to help reach their peak potential? And I guess if you think Barrett is someone that could be a second best player on a contender, I think it, like, even you're shaking your head, like I definitely didn't start at best player, but like second is probably generous. Brunson has been the second best guy on a team that made the conference finals. We just spent 20 minutes talking about that. But like, so you're throwing good picks after bad money. It's not throwing good money after bad. It's throwing these picks to get off these. So do you want to win, 5 or 10 more games over the next couple of years by changing this roster construction, and it costs you picks, and you still probably don't have a ceiling that's as high as you would need it to be to justify that? I don't know, but it's hard to not want to do something when the problems are obvious, when the roster is imbalanced, when the roster doesn't make sense, when the best players are sort of being hindered by other guys that play a lot. Like, how do you solve this problem without making a bunch of concessions that lower your ceiling for the next half decade? I don't know, but I understand. So I guess what I would do is, like, you might just have to wait this out. You might just have to say, we wait a year or two, and then it's easier to get off these contracts that we don't want. But that sucks. Like, that's not realistic. Guys, general managers and coaches have short contracts. They're not going to say, well, yeah, let's look at 2028. It's not like a fan that can say, or an owner that can say, we got a long time horizon. That's just not how it works. So, like, you're just going to have to give up stuff you don't want to if you want this to change, and you're going to screw yourself over the next, handful of years. It's rough, because I get it. There's totally logical to want to change how this roster looks. It's just the cost is going to be high.
Yeah, and it's just, I mean, you could wait, but then like some of the players and picks that you team trade assets are going to no longer exist. Mm-hmm. Like, they're going to be players will be on their next contracts. Those picks will turn into players, and they'll have less mystique. And so that's why the Knicks are in such a tough situation. The real question we should have asked is, are the Knicks failing Jalen Brunson? Like, that dude's been spectacular. And like, he comes and all of a sudden they're like 6th in corner 3-point attempt rate, but just, they don't hit shots from beyond the arc, and they still don't take enough of them. I think they're 18th in 3-point attempt rate overall. So I'm with the change, but if it's not a star, like, is there a way to do it without giving up or bankrupting yourself of assets? And I don't know the answer to that question, but yes, I do think Miles Turner would be a great fit for this team.
No question.
Miles Turner would also be a great fit for this team that we have a question on. How is that for a segue? This was asked a little bit ago, but it was pre the Pelicans loss to the Grizzlies and then pre their victory on Monday night. But Rome 8180 asks, like, their defense and offense have improved during this recent stretch. Is this a function of something that's changed? Just random noise, weak competition? And he has a second part to that. But so the Pelicans, since they were like 500, so going back to like, I think the date was on this November 9th, they are 7-3 over their last 10 games. Third in net rating, 6.7, eighth in offense, and third in defense. Have you noticed anything about their improvement? I made some observations myself, but I'm just curious as to what you think. And look, they've done it, by the way. Like, CJ McCollum has missed time. Brandon Ingram just missed Monday night's game. They have not, for a team that's like firmly in the mix, they have not had like their full cachet of players available much this year.
Yeah, I think that's part of it, is just, generally getting some bodies back. Although, like you said, I mean, the problem with all of this is I'm assuming that this time frame includes the 45-point win over the Warriors when they didn't play any of their starters. And so if you're talking about defensive rating and net rating and anything like that, it's all just like completely destroyed by that. Congratulations, you beat one of the worst benches in the league into the dust, and your net rating is going to be juiced for like the next 2 months probably from that. So yeah, that kind of punts on the question, I think, because like what that does, I was taking their last 6 games, which included that Warriors one, and this is probably a little further beyond when this question is asking about. But if you take that out and say the Warriors just go in and beat them in a close game, or it's close or whatever, you're talking about 3-3 over the last 6, and the Pelicans wins were over the Bulls, Spurs, and Thunder. So like, how good do you feel about that? How probative is that really of the team's actual quality? I don't know, but it's definitely not the same thing as just looking at what their net rating is, because it's going to be messed up for a while. I'm kind of more interested in like some of the similar roster balance questions, with respect to, does CJ McCollum have a role? Like, is he superfluous, is the word that Rome 8180 used?
Yeah, that's the second part of the question is CJ McCollum superfluous on the Pelicans?
And related to that is because the Pelicans look really good when Jose Alvarado's in the game. It kind of makes more sense because he's just looking to distribute, and the Pelicans have a lot of high usage, worthwhile offensive guys that need the ball, and Alvarado just gets off the ball. And so that's helpful. I think I guess I should answer the first part of the question. I think maybe this is just sort of what we expected the Pelicans to be like from the outset, which is they're going to score a ton. Their defense is going to be a question. Again, that defensive rating is iffy because of that Warriors game where they gave up 83 points. I think you were higher on the Pelicans, I think, than I was at the start of the season, but this is sort of what we expected, more or less, where, yeah, they're going to be good to really good, and it's going to be offensively driven. And if there's enough stops in there, then yeah, they're like a 50-win team potentially. That's roughly what we're looking at. But the roster construction thing is interesting because I think it just depends on the answers to questions that we still don't have yet, which is like, how much should Zion have the ball in his hands? Because if the answer is a lot, then CJ McCollum could be replaced by more of a catch and shoot guy, or someone that's like, yeah, he could attack, from the second side when the ball gets swung and run a pick and roll, but you don't need a high usage, get into the lane and create your own, 17-footer in that context so much. And if it's that Zion doesn't need the ball as much, well, then you need at least another really good defender in that lineup alongside Herb Jones, because Zion's defense is, crippling sometimes, and you're not getting quite enough from certainly McCollum. Ingram is like passable to, depending on the night you catch him. Valanciunas is probably a subpar defender. So I think that focusing on McCollum is kind of the easier thing, because if you say, well, Ingram and Zion, there's your 1-2, let's get role players around them that defend, maybe. But I don't know that we're sure yet that Zion is someone that should have the ball all the time, that the offense should run through. That might be the case. So I think before you look at like balancing this roster or, moving McCollum, that's not what the question's asking, but if you're saying he's superfluous, then that's sort of implied, I guess, because he's being paid a ton, so you can't just not play him. I think you just need to figure more out. I think that I don't have a theory of like, what is the optimal lineup and playing style and sort of usage distribution on this Pelicans team. And until we have a better idea of that, I think you probably just want to keep as much like talent in the fold as possible and playing. So I would still give the edge to McCollum over Alvarado in that regard. But it's a worthwhile question. And I think it just highlights like we're still kind of early in this experiment because everybody's hurt all the time and we haven't got a sustained look at what the best version of the Pelicans is.
This is fun because I think we disagree fundamentally on it. I think that this has been really informative for them. And I think a big shift is, and part of this actually might be because of the availability issues, but like Zion has the ball in his hands more, which is absolutely the answer, especially during the regular season, just to bust up some of these defenses. His drives are up during this stretch. They've had him run more pick and rolls. I also like the look more, which is why like the Larry Nance Jr., Zion Williamson front court, like the noise on there, like there's a lot of statistical noise on it, I'll say, but like there are just moments where it's like, well, if that was Miles Turner, and Miles Turner's a better chance of holding up over the course of a season and defensively a lot at the 5. I also think, and I won't say overall, I think Zion's kind of gotten a little bit better on defense this year away from the ball. On the ball, as you mentioned, it feels like there can just be a lot of damaging possessions for him. And I also feel like that's why someone like Miles Turner could help, because Valanciunas is more of just like that's not someone like, if you need him as like your rim protector who doesn't have to make a lot of complicated reads, fine. Larry Nance Jr. is like kind of on his best at the perimeter, like making a lot of switches, similar to Jackson Hayes, who hasn't really played this year. Zion has just done better with the off-ball stuff, where doesn't feel like he's getting burned as much by ball watching. He's making just like if you watch him, like he's kind of moving all over the place. Players are shooting under 58% against him at the rim this year, under 55% during this stretch that we're talking about. There's something here, I think. And I do the point that you made, I totally forgot about the Warriors no hands on deck win that the belt. Like they had it wasn't all hands on deck. It was no hands on deck for Golden State. So I do think there's definitely noise in the schedule, but I think this team is just like, it's ready and it's on the cusp if it's healthy, and the type of ball pressure they can provide, if they can trust Zion to be rotating when you have Jose Alvarado and Herb Jones and even Dyson Daniels and Trey Murphy, that's huge. And with CJ McCollum, maybe he's superfluous or awkward during the regular season. That is absolutely a player I want in this rotation come playoff time, where to have that third ball handling, like third legitimate ball handling option. We're not talking about maybe we are talking about Milwaukee a little bit just because Giannis's ball handling has gotten better and he can do so much with the ball in his hands. Like having that third player who can just self-create for others, or self-create for himself even, but also table set for others. I think there's a pathway to making it work. And I'm wondering if and Roman mentioned this, like, are we jaded a little bit because of how slow CJ McCollum was to start the season? I want him on this team. And he's not, I wouldn't view him as just like mission critical, I guess. But I think that he's absolutely someone who's going to help them in the postseason, maybe even more so than the regular season.
I think I agree in theory that Zion with the ball makes the most sense. But then, so I get what I kept thinking of as you were talking was, is Dyson Daniels like low key the like major swing piece for this team? Because I think if you're talking about the playoffs, I think CJ is going to get targeted. I think Zion will still get targeted. I think Valanciunas is going to get called up to defend. So you just have so many. If Daniels could be a reliable shooter, and I think Daniels has immense defensive potential because he's a big guard and he's a good passer, and he just sort of makes in the best version of this Pelicans team that is balanced and less exploitable in the playoffs. I think that a premium, like top, like 90th percentile of his potential, Dyson Daniels is like the right guy to be in there versus maybe a McCollum, who would be a huge luxury as a third ball handler scorer, but who I think will get attacked a little bit. But yeah, I think I'm being maybe too pessimistic, but that's sort of, I've been like a notch below you on the Pelicans, I think, throughout. And maybe that's just because I still want to see more to prove to me that like the offense, defense, low usage, high usage mix works. But yeah,
The
it's a good question. I think like we just need to see the signs like be sustained over a long period and for everybody to stay healthy, which is a big ask on this team.
I think my roundabout take was that Jonas Valanciunas is probably the one who's superfluous on this roster, and we've seen like they're doing a lot of this success they're having now with not rebounding as well as they were before. And I know Valanciunas is shooting the ball well, but the most dynamic version of the Pelicans, I think, probably if it doesn't, I don't want to say it doesn't include him, it includes an upgrade
Yeah.
over Jonas Valanciunas would be my
Yeah.
point there. And also,
Which
you mentioned Dyson Daniels, 41.5% from three over his last 10 games. That's
yeah,
talk about a swing piece. If that's like something, it's like negligible volume, but if he's just
right.
hitting ultra wide open threes every now and again with the way he can work in space with the ball, a couple of his defensive ubiquity, that's massive.
Yeah, if you have him and Herb running around like causing trouble, like that's a pretty good start. I still think you need someone to keep people away from the rim, and maybe that's Nance. I mean, Miles Turner. Can it just be Miles Turner?
I'm
Can we
happy.
just
I did get a DM saying Pelicans fans are not my idea specifically, but I was lampooned for basically the past 2 years for saying that they need to get Miles Turner. Not need, but like, and I was willing to listen. Like we hadn't seen Zion and Jonas, but I was DM saying that like Pelicans fans are coming around on the idea of Miles Turner now. So I'm glad to hear that. At least I wasn't completely off base.
I feel like that's been the most no-brainer destiny. I mean, Charlotte was thrown around a lot, but nobody needs to go to Charlotte now.
He is. I'd be interested to see like the splits with Zion on and off of like opponents over the last 10 games. Are shooting 82.6% at the rim against Jonas Valanciunas. Like there could be an element of overattacks. Like what is he trying to cover up? But like
That's pretty good.
this is not the ideal front court pairing.
I think that's it. Unless you got anything else, I'll take us out. Thank you everybody for listening and for your questions too. I really like doing these mailbags. I think Dan feels the same. So engage with us. Get on Discord. I did it. Anyone can do it. Like, subscribe, download, rate us. Tell your friends. Word of mouth still matters. We really appreciate when anyone says anything nice about the pod on Twitter or anywhere else. It doesn't have to be on social media. Just tell someone quietly. That's good too. Join the Discord. Last thing, I did it. Would love to talk to everybody on there, get some more questions, all that other stuff. In closing, even though I shouted him out and said a nice thing about him, I would like to apologize to Jared Allen. And on behalf of Dan, just want to celebrate the one and only greatest human alive that has ever lived and still can't get on the floor, but someday will, and justice will be served, Frank Ntilikina.